This morning, we are following a really big Sunday, last Sunday. Last Sunday was Resurrection Sunday, Easter Sunday. It's the Sunday that we all come together and we praise the fact that our God is not dead, but is very much alive. And we celebrate that, and that gives us reason for hope and joy and life and peace. And we walk into all of that. But as we leave the service, as much as all of that is true, and that is the good news of all of this, we're still waiting. We're still left here waiting for Christ to come again and to right all the things that are so wrong in this world. And we're waiting, and as we wait, we have a front row seat to see all of this devastation, this idolatry, war, perversion, you name it. We see it before our eyes, and we are left with some questions. Questions begin to arise in our hearts and in our minds, and things like what I heard at our life group just the other week ago. We were having a big discussion, and we came to some of these questions. Questions like, how can a good God allow so much evil in this world? Why is it that all of these awful people are prospering, and yet I'm just here trying to flounder and make it by? Why is it that I have to struggle like this? Why is it that God allowed blank to happen in my life? Why is it, how is it that God could ask me to go through blank, to do blank? This doesn't make sense, God. And as we're talking about these things in our life group, in the midst of our home there at the parsonage, I have also had conversations with you all online, you all here in the pews, and heard questions like these come up as you're walking through your journey with Jesus, as you're processing the craziness of this world. And as I've heard these questions, God just kind of kept reminding me, go back to my word. Go back to my word, and specifically to a small book, a minor prophet named Habakkuk. And so today we're going to begin a 4-week series where we're walking through a book that's all about tough questions, a book that kind of gives us a roadmap of sorts as to how to walk through the tough questions to the trusting moments, to the rejoicing moments. And this book is the book of Habakkuk, and it's a series that we've entitled Habakkuk When God Doesn't Make Sense. Because you and I walk through moments in life where we, like Habakkuk, are going to say, God, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand this, right? And so what I wanted to do to kick things off, like I try to do with every book study, is we need to kind of have some context. We need to have a little background information, something to help us as we're just diving into this random book in the Bible. It's good for us to know some information, some underpinnings of this book. And so here's some general information for you. So Habakkuk is a minor prophet. Now, the fact that minor is right there before prophet doesn't mean he's any less significant. It just simply means the size of the book. So Habakkuk is only 3 chapters as compared to like Isaiah, that's 66 chapters. And so it's much smaller. That's why he gets the term minor prophet. And in these 3 chapters, a structure of it, so to speak, is that we're going to see him walk through a questioning stage where he's asking God questions and God is going to answer. And then we're going to see him be called by God into a trusting stage. And then finally in chapter 3, we're going to see him in a rejoicing stage where he accepts the words of God and ends up rejoicing the God who is in control, who is sovereign, who actually, although it doesn't make sense to us, knows what he's doing. And so we're going to walk through these 3 stages together, and truthfully, that's kind of a roadmap for you and me too. What I hope that we learn from Habakkuk is that we too can have questions, but we too can move into a trusting stage of trusting the God who cares, the God who's in control, and ultimately rejoice him at the end of it all. And that's kind of where we're going to be going. Now, that's the structure. That's kind of who Habakkuk is. Outside of that, we know very little about the man of Habakkuk. Here's what we do know. So his name in Hebrew is actually pronounced Habakkuk. And that's the English transliteration there of the Hebrew. It's spelled with a CH. And so you say it Habakkuk. It has that guttural language, right? The Hebrews, the Jewish people are really good at doing that. And so I just imagine, like, back in the day, whenever his parents were, like, holding Habakkuk, right? We say Habakkuk, but they're holding Habakkuk, and someone comes up and says, hey, who do you have there? And they're like, I have a kook. And so we all of our families have a kook, right? And so Habakkuk was that one. So Bible humor, you gotta love it. But his name literally means to embrace or to wrestle. And we're going to see how that's a very appropriate name for him as he's going to learn to embrace this God who is in control. But he has lots of questions, and he's going to wrestle with that. And then what's next is that, he's not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. You will not see Habakkuk's name come up any longer, but you will see him quoted. And so there's several moments in the Bible where this book will be quoted, and we'll talk about one of those later in this message. But his name will never come up again. And the final thing that's really important for us to know is that he prophesied in the final decades of Israel's southern kingdom of Judah. And so this is about 600 BC-ish. And so this is the time in which he is speaking. Now, this time is a time of injustice and idolatry. It's this cultural decay of sorts in the place of Judah. And so we're going to unpack that some as we go forward. But now that we know some general information, let's dive into the text. We're going to read the first 5 verses of Habakkuk this morning. And so if you've got your Bibles open to the book of Habakkuk, they'll also be here on the screen as well. We're going to start off in verse 1. And so it says this: the prophecy that Habakkuk the prophet received. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you, violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict. It abounds. Therefore the law is paralyzed, and justice it never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so justice is perverted. And hear God's answer in verse 5. Look at the nations and watch. Be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. And we'll pause there. If you were looking at these verses on the screen, you might have recognized I emphasized some of the language here. A lot of the see and look and watch, because this text has a lot to do with sight. You might have recognized in our worship this morning, it was open the eyes of my heart. And so it's a lot of our focusing on the seeing this morning. So this text is all about sight. It actually begins with the word prophecy, that this is a prophecy. Some of your translations might say oracle, that this is a prophecy or an oracle of Habakkuk. And the Hebrew word there actually means a heavy load. And so he is saying, the prophet Habakkuk is saying, I'm seeing with my own eyes. I have this burden for what I'm seeing, God. And if you remember in verse 3, he starts the complaint out and he says, why do you make me see injustice? Why is it that I have to look at this? It's ever before me, right? Why do you call me to look on destruction? And God's ultimate answer that he gives Habakkuk in verse 5 is that you just pay attention. Look out before you, because there's actually an unexpected answer. I'm actually going to use this nation, the Babylonians, to bring about judgment. It's something that you can't even comprehend, but this is what I'm doing. And so let's dive into these verses a little bit deeper, right? So as I've already said, Habakkuk is written in this time of cultural decay in the southern kingdom of Judah. And so there is all of this wild stuff going on. It's a geopolitical upheaval is happening. Like the Assyrian Empire was in charge, but they're on decline. And then the Babylonians are starting to make some noise, and they're on the rise to power. And God is going to say, I'm going to use those Babylonians, those bad boys there, to bring judgment, a celestial spanking of sorts to my children Israel. I'm going to do this to them. And so Habakkuk, whose name literally means to embrace or to wrestle, has to wrestle with the fact that he's looking at all of this decay, all of this craziness before his eyes, and he sees all of this on one hand, but on the other hand, he knows he serves a good God. And so he's trying to reconcile this. He's wrestling with this. God, if you are so good, then why is all of this bad happening? And even worse, I'm speaking of the bad that God's people are doing. We can bring it to this day. Why is it, God, if you're so good, that your church just stinks? Like, the people are not living the way they should. They're hypocrites. Like, how is this, God? I can't make sense of this, right? We wrestle with these questions. And so you start to see Habakkuk in verses 2 and 3. He's like emptying the thesaurus of sorts to describe this decay. He's saying, God, I cry out violence. All I see is injustice and wrongdoing, destruction, strife and conflict. It's all right here. I see all of this, but you're good. That doesn't make sense to me. How could you allow so much bad? And so he calls out to God and he says, how long are you going to just sit there? How long, O Lord? He calls him Lord. That's the word that he chooses to describe God here. And that word Lord is the covenant-keeping name for God. That is what he is using there. He's saying, you are the God who keeps his word. I know that to be true of you, God. I know that you are the God of Israel. And in light of your character, how is it that all this is happening? I've got questions. How is it that everywhere I look, I see perversion and evil, wickedness? It's just multiplying on itself. And worse yet, your word, the law, it says it's paralyzed, the text says. It's not doing a thing. Nothing is going the way it should, God. How can I reconcile this? How do I justify this knowing what I know about you? Pause. That is 600 BC. Let me bring it to 2023. It looks about the same. We can sit here, and I don't have to stretch the text much at all to tell you that we are in a time of cultural decay. We are in a time where violence is so prevalent. You and I can't go to the grocery store. We can't drop off our kids at school. Heck, we can't even come to church without fear of being shot and killed. We can't even, all of the different pleasures and things that are encouraged in this world, the perversion and stuff that we see, it's ever rampant before us. There's wars and rumors of wars, both nationally and internationally. It's all over the place. Our world is decaying. We live in a time of cultural decay where the law itself, God's word, is just being pushed to the side, being perverted of all sorts and contorted so that it fits our agendas. And we sit here and we're wondering, how do I navigate this? How do I make sense of this? Given the fact of who you are, God, the covenant-keeping good God, how is all this bad happening? And the rest of the book of Habakkuk is going to show us how to wrestle with this, how to wrestle with that. Habakkuk is actually the only book, I left this out of the points about things that we know about Habakkuk. Habakkuk is the only book of the minor prophets where he does not actually address the people of Israel. He actually is just having a dialogue between him and God. And so what we have in these pages here is the prayer journal. It is the one-on-one dialogue between Habakkuk and God, where Habakkuk is just being raw and honest and saying, God, this doesn't make sense. I'm going to question this. I need some answers. And God, the just good God, can take those questions, take that struggle, and give answer right back. That helps us along our journey with him. And so I wanted to take the last bit of our time this morning to really focus on that one verse, God's answer in chapter 5, in verse 5, and show us how there's some applications that we can take away that help us journey forward in our days of cultural decay, in our days of struggle. Okay, so when God just doesn't make sense, right? Like, we're living in that too. And so the first thing I wanted to share is that just because you don't see God working doesn't mean he isn't working. Just because you don't see God working doesn't mean he isn't. God tells Habakkuk, he says, look among the nations. Literally, he's saying, hey, Habakkuk, I'm doing stuff. I know you don't see it, but I'm doing stuff. Just because you can't perceive that I'm at work doesn't mean I'm not working. I am. I'm very much working. It's like the idea, the sun, it draws up water all over our world. Like, our world has tons and tons of water, and day in and day out, the sun draws it up into evaporation from all the different bodies of water around the globe. Millions and millions of metric tons. This happens every minute, and you and I, we don't really feel that. We don't really see that for the most part, except when when we're taking a hot bath and it like rises up the steam and stuff. We see that occasionally, but like we understand that clouds bring rain, and rain runs into rivers, which eventually runs into the ocean, and there's this big circle. We get that. We don't necessarily fully understand it, but God is at work in that. In the same way that we don't maybe understand all the things of photosynthesis, we can understand that it's still happening, right? All these different scientific things. Last thing, I'll get off of the science. The world is actually traveling around the sun at 67,000 miles per hour. Did you know that? None of us actually feel that, right? It's not like I'm like falling off the stage right now, but like it's moving. And it's moving, but we don't necessarily feel that. God is at work. And just because we can't see it, just because we can't feel it, doesn't mean he's not working. In your personal life, don't be discouraged. Don't fall into despair just because you can't see or feel him. The one who began a good work in you will finish it until the end, until Christ Jesus comes. You might not understand how he's working. You might not see how he's working, but just know that we serve a working God. He is at work right now. We can rest in his character. We can rest in his track record, in his resume. We can hear the testimonies of others and how God has worked in their life, and he too can work in yours. We can trust in that, whether we see it or feel it or not. Another application I think that we can take from this verse, see, the text says, "Look at the nations and watch. Be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told." And as I read that verse, it really suggested to me that God works in comprehensive ways on scales way too massive for us to even comprehend. He works in ways that his ways are higher than our ways, right? It's in ways that we cannot fully comprehend. In other words, God is looking at the checkers board and he's actually playing chess. Like we see checkers, God is playing chess, but he's not playing just normal chess. Like God is playing that 3D Star Trek chess. You guys remember this? Like Captain Kirk. We got any Trekkies in here? We got one. Matt holding it down. So in Star Trek, we Captain Kirk, he plays this wild-looking version of chess, right? And I don't understand chess in general, but he's playing it in this 3D way. God is playing in infinitely more multiple dimensions of chess and moving pieces around in our lives in ways that we cannot comprehend. But he's comprehensive in the way that he moves these pieces. I'll keep running with this in just a moment. But the text is suggesting, he's saying, look at these nations. God is saying that I have all this stuff in my hands. I have you in my hands, Habakkuk, but I also have the nations in my hands. Daniel, in the book of Daniel, he basically says the same thing. If you've ever read the book of Daniel, there's this king named Nebuchadnezzar, and he has all these wild dreams, and God has given Daniel the ability to interpret dreams. And essentially what Daniel points out and what he makes is he says, hey, Nebuchadnezzar, heaven rules. Heaven rules, not you, not me, not the nations, not kingdoms or powers. Heaven rules. God rules. Nations will come, nations will go. Kingdoms will rise, kingdoms will fall. But ultimately there's one who controls it all. He owns it all, and he's moving the pieces on this chessboard in a way that makes sense to him, but it might not make sense to you and me. But here's the kicker. God is the one who always wins the chess match. If you ever play chess, like I played it maybe once or twice. I'm a novice, you might say. A novice chess player. I can think maybe 1 to 2 moves ahead. A novice can actually think 3 to 4 moves ahead when they play. Now, if you are someone who says, I really enjoy chess, I'm not a novice, I'm an intermediate player. An intermediate chess player can actually think 8 to 10 moves ahead. I mean, that's pretty good, right? Like I think that's pretty great. But if you've ever seen a master chess player play, it's pretty phenomenal, because a master chess player has the entire game thought through before they even make the first move. It's brilliant. And the truth is, I'm here to tell you this morning, our God is a master of master chess players. He is moving things around in ways that we cannot comprehend. And can I make it a little more personal for us this morning? He's been moving pieces in your life and in my life, even to the point where you would be here right now on the other end of that screen, or here in this pew today, to hear these words this morning or this evening, whenever it is that you're watching it. but that you would be here today to hear this word. When you look back over all of your life, there's no coincidences. It's the providence of God. And he's moving so that you would be here right now to hear him and to feel him in a way that you maybe never have before. He is the one, I'll take it even more personal. He's the one who brought your parents together, your mama and your daddy. You might have been a whoopsie to them, but you weren't a whoopsie to God, right? Like, God is the God of providence. He's brought this thing together. He is the one who designed you fearfully and wonderfully made. He's the one who knows every hair on your head. He knew the skin tone that you'd have, the sound of your voice, where you go to school, the neighborhood you grow up in, all the things that would lead you to right here. God knew it all because he has a master plan for your life. And it's a plan for your good. It is. He's moving. You might not understand it. It might not make sense right now. You don't even have to get it all, but just know that he is moving in comprehensive ways that might not seem, that are incomprehensible to you and to me, but he's still moving. The third application, I think, that we can take from this text, if he tried to explain all of it, it still wouldn't make sense to us. And the truth is because everything belongs to him, he really doesn't owe us any explanation of the plan. And that might come across as a little harsh, but we'll unpack that some. Because everything belongs to him, he really doesn't owe us any explanation as to how it is or why it is that he does things. Here is the unexpected answer to Habakkuk's question. Habakkuk is like, how long, God? How long are we going to go through this? And why is it that this is happening? And God's answer is, well, it ain't none of your business. God does not owe him any answer. Psalm 24 tells us that the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. God owns it all. He created it all, and he doesn't owe any of us an explanation for something that was created for him. I'll say it this way. This morning when I put on this shirt and I put this thing on, I did not expect my shirt to look at me, the shirt that was made for me, to fit me, to look at me and say, hey, Kody, don't you think you wear that shirt a lot? Like, these people have probably seen you in this at least 20 times. Like, this is my go-to comfy preaching shirt. And so they know this about you, man. You should probably change. And I would say, no shirt. I bought you. I bought you as something that I'm going to wear. And I'll wear you the way that I want to wear you. If I want to wear a tie, I'll put on a tie. If I don't, then I won't. And so I don't want to hear anything coming from you, shirt, because you were made for me. You were made to fit me. Why don't you just let me fill you and take you where it is that is good for you to go? God does not owe us any explanations because we belong to him. Those of us who have been bought by the blood of the Lamb, we are his. We've been bought with the price. And God is desiring that we would just let him fill us and take us to the places that are good for us to go. That's all he's desiring. And if I'm understanding this text correctly, it's teaching us that as Habakkuk is raising these questions and raising these concerns and things, these complaints you might say, that God essentially owes him no explanation. He just wants him to trust him and to move forward. And while that last point, he owes no explanation, might sound harsh, I think it leads us to this last takeaway, that even though it might seem harsh, we can rest in God's character because whatever he decides to do is right. You'll notice I didn't say good, although it is good because what God does ultimately brings about our good and his glory. I didn't say good, I said right. Because in our eyes, it might not seem good. It doesn't make sense, God. I don't understand X, Y, or Z. But what he decides to do is right. When you and I get done talking, when you and I get done raising questions, and I just want to say here, it's okay to raise questions. God didn't bite his head off here, right? Job, the book of Job, explains to us very clearly that we can ask questions. God can handle our questions. We serve a big God. Our questions aren't too big for him. But when we get done talking, and when we get done, complaining, we can sit here and recognize that whatever it is that God does decide to do, we can rest in his character. Because we know that whatever he does, it isn't just for his glory, but it's also for yours and for my good. That is how our God works. And so God is giving this unexpected answer to Habakkuk's question, right? This burdensome question that he is feeling. How can you be a good God and yet I see all of this bad? It doesn't make sense to me. How can you be a good God, yet I'm walking through all of this? It doesn't make sense. And the unexpected answer that he gets is God says, take a step back. Just take a step back and look. Look a little bit closer. I'm going to do something that you can't even imagine, because if you could, it still wouldn't make sense. I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, the big bad Babylonians, and I'm going to use them to bring about my judgment onto the people of Israel, the people of Judah that are not living in ways that are honoring to me. I'm going to bring judgment on them. Don't worry about it, though. I'm working in ways that you can't comprehend. It's actually for your good and for my glory. Ultimately, God explains to Habakkuk that since it is all about me, and I have all of this under control, I own all of this, you need to recognize, just rest in faith. The just shall live by faith. We'll read that verse here in the next week. But we need to rest in God's character. We don't have to live by everything that we see, but we live by our faith. It's like this. There's some TV shows and stuff that I like to watch, and Lake and I like to enjoy together, Netflix or different TV, and I've gotten into the habit now of, like, when I watch a show, I try to pay attention to who produces it, and because sometimes it gives a little bit of a window into how the movie or how the show is going to be. And so one time, Lake and I were watching this show, and it was this show in the early 2000s called Alias. I don't know if any of y'all ever watched it. It's a fun thriller, action, maybe a little bit of sci-fi mixed in there show. And Sydney Bristow, right here on the screen, is the main character, right? And we would sit on the edge of our seat every single night as we were watching it, just thinking, how is Sydney going to get out of this next thing? Like, she is in this weird predicament, no way she's getting out. And so we'd stay up, and we probably should have went to bed. The kids are going to wake us up at an obscene hour of the night, and we had work to do the next day. We should probably go to bed, but we were on the edge of our seat wanting to see how the episode would end and what would happen if she'd make it out. Well, finally, by God's grace, you might say, we were watching a show and let it go to the end, and I saw in the lineup of things at the credits that one of the producers of the show was actually the actress here, Sydney Bristow. She was Jennifer Gardner. She's still Jennifer Gardner. She was one of the producers of the show. And you know what it done for me, what it did for me, and I imagine Lakin as well, is that we were able to start going to bed and not really worrying about if she was going to make it out or not, right? Like, we knew as long as the producer was the main character, everything's going to be all right. Like, as she's secure, right? There's going to be another episode. She's going to make it. No matter how bad it looked, as long as the producer is the main character, everything is going to be all right. And I came here to say this morning, through this message, that I know the producer. I know God, and He is the main character. He's the one that it should be all about. And if it's all about Him and we keep Him at the center, man, everything's going to be all right. Even if it seems like all heck is breaking loose and this world is just run amok and it's a mess, everything's going to be all right. I'll give you one last hook here at the very end. I found it really interesting, really cool. In the New Testament, as I said, Habakkuk, his name is not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible, but you'll find him quoted all throughout it. And one of the quotes is in Acts 13. The Apostle Paul has given a sermon in Acts 13, and he actually quotes Habakkuk 1, verse 5. He makes this argument that Jesus not only is the Christ, but that He was put to death by the evil intentions of evil men. But because God is a master chess player, right? What they meant for evil, God meant for good. And even if they would have understand, like, they did not fully comprehend it, because if they did, they never would have put the Son of God to death. But they did, and because they did, He was risen to life, and power was given into His right hands. Paul essentially is saying in Acts 13, as he's quoting Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 5, he's given a warning. He's saying that God can even use judgment for His glory, that God can even use tough circumstances for His glory, and that's ultimately seen clearest on the cross. That the judgment of God that should have rightly been put on you and on me instead was placed on Himself, on His Son. there on the cross. He bore our sins, and because he was able to do that, he took it to the grave and then defeated it by rising 3 days later. Because what God does, even though it might not make sense to us, is right. He does it for his glory and for our good. He is working in ways that you and I cannot comprehend, but he's calling us to live by faith. I'm going to end this sermon with a little clip of a hymn, a well-known hymn that I'm sure Habakkuk probably would have sung, and I pray that you and I can sing as well. It goes a little something like this. It was there at the cross when I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart, it went away. It was there by faith that I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. It might not make sense right now, but I pray God gives us sight so that we can be happy all the day. Let us pray.